Thank you so much for joining, Dr. Ndhlovu and Catherine Snel, that I've had the pleasure to meet once before in person in ICOM Prague. Thank you for being with me today. Would you like to present yourself both briefly, your role with the South African Museum Association, and what you do in life?
What I doing? What we do in life?
The bigger picture beyond the
Of course, yes.
world.
So I think I will go first, Bongani, if you don't mind. Firstly, thank you so much, Heloise, for inviting Bongani and myself to this discussion. I think we really look forward to this, and I think it's also a very amazing platform, to present South African museums. So, so I'm Catherine Snel. My professional role is I am a museologist. I've been working in museums since 2001. So yeah, about 21 or 22 years, I think. Yeah. And you know what? People always ask me, but why have you studied museology? Why? But I always loved history, And then I decided, listen, I think working in museums will give me that opportunity to work with a subject that I love so much. So I've been working in different museums over these 22 years. I've started my career at the University of Stellenbosch Museum, where I, as a youngster in my mid-20s or maybe early 20s, I worked at the cultural collections. And then as a 25-year-old, I moved 500 kilometers out of Cape Town to a rural town. And then my heart was, I longed my people. So I've only stayed there for 2 years. I came back to a town that is not in Cape Town, but about maybe 50 kilometers outside of Cape Town, but it was closer to home for me then. And I worked at the Afrikaans Language Museum in Paarl for almost 11 years. And now for the last 8 years, I've been working for a corporate company. This company has a museum, an archives, and an art gallery. So I'm the archivist. I manage the archives and the museum, and I love working at this company. And I think I love working with this company history. It's amazing. But my role, let me go back to now. My role in SAMA is that, so I have 2 roles in SAMA. Firstly, I am the chair of ICOM South Africa, and because of the chair of ICOM South Africa, I represent ICOM as an ex-official member on the SAMA Council. And I think the reason for this is just to establish a very good working relationship between the 2 museum professional bodies, but also that we do not step on each other's toes. And then my second role is being the chair of SAMA National Training. And I think I will elaborate on that later on. Okay, so that is me.
Sounds great. Great perspective. And you
Thank you. My name is Bongani Ndhlovu. I am the president of the South African Museums Association. And I've been working in the heritage sector here in the country for more than 2.5 decades now. And I've served on numerous boards and internationally and locally. And I presently work for ICOM Museums as an executive director in charge of core functions broadly. But with effect from last week, the 1st of September, I was appointed by council to be an acting CEO of this beautiful combination of museums. And I look forward also to working with colleagues in the sector to profile museums and museology in general.
Absolutely. Congratulations.
Congratulations, Bongani.
Okay, great. So 2 amazing personalities to bring here today a good perspective on the cultural sector in South Africa. So thank you so much again for being here. And so given the big picture that you have with all these years of experience across different museums, what, according to you, would be the main ongoing challenges that museums are facing in South Africa? First, big question.
That's a very interesting one. I think both of us will take a bite on that one. The main one currently we are facing is a question of resources. I think like any other museum in the country, resources as a museum association, that's what colleagues have been bringing it to our attention. And then by resources, I mean broadly in terms of capital, in funding, and also in terms also of personnel. We've got a scarcity of in terms of expertise in the field, in terms of capacity building. So that's also a second element. And then thirdly, also material in terms of resources that should enable our colleagues to be able to efficiently work with collections, conserve them, interpret them broadly. That is what I would also sort of say from my perspective, that is what is required. And a number of other museums have also outdated exhibitions. That's also another challenge that they are trying to tackle in addition to what I've said.
Thank you. Catherine, did you want to complement?
Yes. I've also made my notes, and my notes is about more or less the same as Bongani's. He mentioned the resources, of course, funding. And what I just can also add to that is that, you know, we've got different sweeps of government. We've got local government, and then provincial government, and then national government. Bongani, their museum is a national museum. They report to national government. So when these different sweeps of government have to set up budgets, museums or cultural activities are not their top priorities. It is sad, but it is true. So budget allocations to museums are very small, and like Bongani said, so because of that, it also has an impact on our resources, you know, to, for example, our collections, and also the programs and the projects that we would like to do, and the research, you know, that has an impact on that as well. But I think funding will always be a problem, you know. And then another thing for me is that, just to give your viewers a perspective of the South African museum landscape, is that he talked about capacity as well. You know, we've got museums, some of them, we've got a lot of rural museums where you will have, for instance, one curator and maybe someone that cleaned the curator, or just another extra person, and then the curator must do everything, you know, and that can cause a lot of stress upon on you as a person, that you have to do everything. And I think because of that, you will have, for example, like Bongani said, outdated exhibitions, or even of your collections. You can't get by to do everything that you're supposed to do. Okay, so that's for me in a nutshell.
Right, that makes sense. Thank you for sharing. And so, as a second question, I wanted to leap into the work that you do with SAMA, so the South African Museum Association. I saw that you offer a series of training programs, and I was wondering if you would like to tell us a little bit about those, or in general, like how SAMA is helping museums with these problems.
Yeah, so since its forming years, SAMA regarded training as very, very important, you know, and much was done to provide the necessary training for museum professions needed. So today, our purpose is to build on that and continue providing direction about professional development in the museum and heritage sector. So we are currently in the process of developing our own courses, and the aim is at new entrants in the museology field, and also to those from other disciplines. And I think what is exciting about these courses is that it is developed by SAMA members, you know, so we are taking charts of our own, and also presented by them. And I think although it is a very rigorous process, but it's also very exciting. We are currently busy running some of these courses. Tomorrow will be our second last day of the courses, and next week it will be it will be the last section in that. So but we've also elaborated with the Dutch government and the Dutch embassy on a range of training programs, and that we've done it over, I think, 2 years. 2000 and we've started in 2018, 19, and in 2020. And so, and it was very, very popular, I must say. I think all of our training courses are very popular because our people are really hungry for training. Well, we still have a lot to do, a long way, but I think it's worth it. And we are, I don't want to say almost there, but we are making very, very, very good processes. Yes.
Right. That's amazing. Okay, that was a really good answer. Maybe Dr. Ndhlovu, if you want, you can dive into the second question, yes, or third one, a little bit more about history and a little bit broader. But I was wondering if we could, for someone who only visited South Africa once, and so who lives far away and doesn't have a deep perspective into what's happening within the country, I was wondering if you could let me know a little bit about the relationship museums had with apartheid, how they tried to, or may have tried to counter it, and their historical relationship that existed there between this historical phenomenon and museums, the cultural sector in South Africa. I know it's a really broad question, but someone who isn't in the country is really not aware at all of that possible relationship and what it would look like, and I'm very curious.
Well, thank you for that question. Museums have a difficult history, which is also embedded in our heritage as a nation. South Africa is a country which experienced colonialism in all different forms and formats. And we also experienced apartheid also, which was declared a crime against humanity. And so institutions of the state, including museums, were involved in entrenching apartheid. And individuals like Catherine and myself, prior to 1994, did not have the privilege or the right to access museums. And so are millions of South Africans who were considered as not white enough or to be part of those institutions. And because of that heritage and history, therefore, the heritage that museums presented prior to 1994 was a heritage which promoted white superiority, which also promoted white culture, and where cultures of the other were displayed were to prove a particular point. So that's the relationship that millions and millions of South Africans who were not privileged or by law were not also allowed to access spaces like parks, museums, and other amenities were exposed to. But on the verge of the historic 1994 elections and post-1994, we've seen a radical overhaul of how institutions of the state work. Instead of them being seen as the tools of oppressions, they become also enablers. Post-1994, we saw museums grappling with question of reconciliations, saw them engaging in nation-building exercises, and we also saw them proactively getting involved in projects that were aimed in building the new nation. And hence, there was a need to reinterpret and then also collect broadly our collections and to reflect and display a nation that was, in terms of its future outlook, forward-looking, while acknowledging the atrocities of the past and learning from those experiences. So that was, in the context, the experience that the majority of South Africans had with museums prior to 1994. Not all is okay post-1994, but we're also very proud of the strides that we've made. If you look at the number of museums in the country and the content that is being displayed by those museums, there's a willingness to change. And there are also a number of exhibitions, collections, including collections that were collected to reinterpret and tell the story of a new nation. And we've seen that also in our education programs that are done by museums, programs that strives to include communities and to engage them and to learn from those communities and to make them part and process and parcel of the museum making process, which is being to an extent very much encouraging and positive, despite all the other challenges that we've had faced.
Absolutely. I'm glad to hear that, and it sounds like you've been tackling a very deep, powerful mission in South Africa. And it's we deeply, when we work in the museum field, we deeply believe in the power the museum have for the social inclusivity, and so it's really interesting to have such a great example with South Africa. And you already partially replied to my next question, but I would love to see also if Catherine, you want to pitch in on so the power that museums have now in South Africa to support equal social justice and equality, and it could be also like a general perspective. If you have an example in particular of an event or a museum's action, I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Okay, so like what Bongani said, before 1994, I mean, like museums were not part of our frame of reference, you know. I can't even think whether my parents ever visited a museum. They only started visiting museums when I started working in museums. So in 1994, the new or the magic word was transformation, you know. And I think when I started working in museums in 2001, and I became part of that conversation or that about transformation and the direction that museums have to take. And I also remembered my professor, my archaeology professor, he always said is that, you know what, Kathy, museums must be a place where everybody can find a place of belonging, you know, even though we were not part of, or we were not recognized during apartheid, is now in this new South Africa, as we've called it, is that whenever I go to a museum, or my nephews or nieces or in anyone else, you know, a person of color, you know, when we go to the museum, we will at least can like, oh, I can identify with this, although this subject matter doesn't speak directly to me, but I can find some of similarities, you know. So that is the whole thing. And I think even for myself as a museologist and working in museum sectors for so long, it was important for me is to, you know, to speak, to talk about, I call it the silent voices, you know, and give their stories and focus also on that as well, but not as to say we're not going to focus on the past. I think we have to somehow find ways where the past and the present can we can talk somehow, you know, because you know, I remembered in the midst of all these changes in 1994, former President Nelson Mandela warned that the new government, that they have to use sensitivity in handling all these changes without doing injustices to other communities. So when 1994 happened, new museums were found during this period, but also existing museums were forced to relook at their collections, their exhibitions, their public programs, and ask themselves, are we inclusive, you know? So we have the old and the new, but somehow we must try to work in ways that we both can find, okay, we don't want to step on each other's toes, you know. We want to make the museum a place where all of us can identify something. And, you know, it's a place where we want to go and not where we feel that we are forced to go to. Okay, so that is my view.
Thank you so much. And now to narrow it down a little bit on your national conference, I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about this. And so what were your key takeaways from the conference last year? And if you want as well, maybe share some goals or hopes you have for the upcoming one, which will be in October again, I think.
Yeah.
Last year, the focus of our last year's conference, national conference, was aligned to the IMD theme, the power of museums, and we broadly focused on sustainability in all its broad sense, and also the questions around digitization and access, and of course, community engagement and education. So we were able to tackle those, and out of those deliberations, there came a whole discussion around the non-fungible tokens and NFTs, and how those can be used or not used to benefit museums, and how the museum community related to those to that question. And that was in essence, and quite interestingly also, because it was a hybrid kind of a conference, which also allowed for colleagues abroad to participate in the deliberations. And also we have also colleagues on the continent that also participated, and colleagues from ICOM also participated, in addition to South Africans. Wonderful papers that were presented, and also panel discussions that we had lined up. And as a carry through to that particular those engagements, we've decided that this year we are going to sort of look again on the question as a conference theme on recollections and reconfiguring the South African museums landscape. And that's what we are looking at and tackling in this year. In essence, we are looking at the recollections. Embedded in the word recollections is the word collections. So we're looking at collections and reconfiguring them, and how do we imagine them, and also how do we therefore take them broader to the South African audience, and also to the world community. And we've subdivided this into a number of sessions. We'll be looking at, as we've indicated, the two of us, that we had to deal with colonialism. So looking at decoloniality and decolonization, and coloniality in its broad sense. We'll also be looking at the question of reconciliation. We've alluded to our difficult past as a nation in the as South Africans, and we'll be also be looking at the question of infrastructure. We'll be tackling those questions. There are museums in South Africa that are closing down because of the basic infrastructure and buildings that are not well maintained. And as a museum association, we said, let us look at those questions and probe them further. So we'll be having engagements around that. And again, those buildings are housing collections. So we'll be looking at the future of collections. Within that context, how are we going to take our collections forward? And also outside of that context, what else needs to be changed, to be done? But as you know, also, all of us are grappling with climate change. And as museums, we are part of that discussions. Some of our colleagues are doing, in fact, wonderful work around climate change. My colleague here, Catherine, has made reference to when she was an archaeology student. So archaeologists are doing some work around climate change, and all sorts of other scientists and researchers are doing work there. They will be sharing with us that. But SAMA has also been rightfully criticized for neglecting natural history museums. The majority of SAMA members are, by default, are coming from other mainstreams, the arts, the humanities, the social sciences, and so our natural historians and also colleagues from that environment have indicated that they want to play an active role in programming. So we'll be looking at natural history museums and societal benefit. And quite interestingly, for the first time in the past few decades, we've seen a number of colleagues from natural history museums and disciplines wanting to contribute. As such, we've also opened up that debate, and we'll also be getting to hear from them we've dedicated 2 sessions to this particular engagement to allow for us to look at it in its totality. Technology is here with us. We've discussed the question of technology last year, and again this year we'll be looking at technical advances. And a young colleague from the National Museums of Kenya will also be joining the conference to explain to us that we don't need to fancy equipments and big gadgets to deal with this particular topic. As young people, they'll be showing to us how they are using simple technologies to advertise and engage with young people, advertise museum content, develop museum content, create and engage young people. Again, we'll also be looking, dedicating a session on marketing and heritage, and we'll also be looking at museums as spaces of public engagement. And the last day, we'll be looking at where Theo will be meeting praxis. We'll be going on sites, engaging with those issues on heritage sites and also on museum sites. So that's broadly what we've learned from last year's engagement and what we'll be taking forward through this year's engagement.
Wow, amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So a lot of topics, ongoing conversations, they're very important. That's great. I'll make sure to add a link at the bottom of the video to register for the conference. And maybe two more questions. I wonder if you want to pitch in for the next one, Catherine. It's also related to ICOM, that's why, which is the International Council of Museums. And so I was wondering if, given the new definition of a museum that was adopted last year in Prague at the conference organized by ICOM, you've had conversation with Sama about what that new definition would do to the work that you're doing in South Africa, if it had any impact, or if you would say it didn't really, because you were already having conversations related to that. And then maybe a last question, and maybe you both have time to pitch in a little bit, would be what are your hopes for museums in South Africa within the next couple of years, and let's say up until the next conference organized by ICOM in Dubai in 2025? So
Okay, yes. Yeah, I must say the museum conversation, there was this conversation between ICOM South Africa and in SAMA in the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, where we invited all our members, our colleagues, to take part in this discussion. But you know, I don't think that people are really, or South Africans, they were, but what can I say now? Not everybody's happy with it. I can say that. There were definitely a few of our colleagues were like saying, but this definition doesn't speak to us, you know. And but I think what was also important for us was to include the Department of Arts, Culture and Sport, because they are the national government, you know, and they must be part of this discussion and the conversation about it. But what I can also say is that during the ICOM, all the ICOM discussions, I can say that it was said to us is that you listen, this definition doesn't have to be so rigid, and that national committees, institutions, then they can adopt to the definition. But yeah. So, but they've also inspired us to take this conversation further, you know. But you know, a very interesting thing is that, you know, sometimes when we invite people to come and have and talk about this, many people will not come. They will only when you have now this definition, and then they will come and like, oh, this doesn't speak to us. Oh, we have this and that problem, you know. But I think currently we have introduced this to our members, of course, yes, and we are positive, and yeah, we will definitely looking forward to implement it and making part of what we are supposed to do. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, and we have about a minute left. Do you want to pitch in on one of you or the two of you a little bit on your hopes? Let's say for the next few years, what would you hope to see South African museums have accomplished?
You know, for me, it is Bongani just gives such a clear outline of our next conference. You know, our colleagues do amazing work in the different institutions. So for me, is it like continue for us to making an impact in our different communities and just sending positive messages of reconciliation and change throughout South Africa, you know, and also our communities.
Sounds great.
Okay.